My name's Kylie Wilson. Many of you may know me for my documentary Rubber Jellyfish, which was an ocean documentary. But you may not realize that well before I became interested in ocean conservation issues, I was always a lifelong forest conservationist. I was shocked years ago to learn that the number 2 deforestation hotspot in the world is actually Queensland, Australia, where I live. And right below us in New South Wales lies many forests that are under threat. And I learned recently about a phenomenon that I had never heard of before called a zombie DA. What's that? I had no idea either. A zombie DA, it stands for Zombie Development Approval. So it is a piece of land that has been approved for development, but this approval might have happened decades ago, which is why they call them zombie DAs, because they can kind of come back from the dead at a moment's notice. I learned after the 2001 Black Summer bushfires, which I'm sure most of you would remember. It was on the news right around the world. Huge, vast tracts of land were completely obliterated all across New South Wales. And they estimate now that 3 billion animals died in those bushfires. 3 billion. That's a number that's far too big for me to comprehend. But I met a rural firefighter volunteer years ago, and he was telling me about how hard he had worked to save this particular forest, he and his crew. They risked their lives to do it. I met with him and his wife, or I did this over Zoom actually. And it was incredibly inspiring to hear what they had done. And they managed to save this one particular forest, this one particular piece of land, which maybe wouldn't have been considered hugely significant originally, or maybe it would have. But after the fires, it was significant in a way that it had never been before because everything else had been burned. It became a refuge for animals to come in, and it became a really important seed source so that the forest could then regenerate after the fires. But this firefighter told me that just a few months after the fires had come through, dozers were set and ready to knock the trees down because it had been approved many years ago for housing development. Now, I'm extremely aware of how important housing is. We have housing crises right around the world, not surprising with the rate of overpopulation. People need places to go. But in this particular town, 64% of the homes that are already there are vacant. So a few weeks ago, I was lucky enough to pack up my 2 beautiful little children into a van, and off we went on this amazing camping trip to this little town called Manyana. And I got to meet this fellow Bill, who's the president of the group of activists that are fighting so hard still to save this forest.
So if you look at this, where we are is right here, where that little blue dot is, and you can see that dark area of up there. It's like a dark red, or like a red colour. We move that into the plate, and what does it say? South Coast Temperate Gully Rainforest.
Right.
The proponent reckons it doesn't exist.
And could you explain, like you would be explaining to a kindergartner, what a ghost, or sorry,
A zombie?
Yeah, a zombie DA is?
Well, it's a DA. It's a development application that was approved. It could be up to 50 years ago. They were approved under old environmental laws, and developers grab those land parcels and they just keep them for a while, then they sell them on, and so all of a sudden you're living in a beautiful place like this, and it's been ravaged by fire, and next thing you know, this zombie DA pops up and goes, oh, we're going to clear this essential natural piece of environment. So that's what's happening. It's happening right up and down the coast now as less and less land is available in these small coastal places for development, they're looking at developing these critical natural habitats.
And would you say that these are areas that if they were looking for development approval today, they could not get?
Absolutely, we believe that they could not get it, no. Under current laws, that's correct. So we actually commissioned an ecological survey on the block.
Yep.
And so we got a very experienced, very well-respected ecologist to come down, who is, this is his baby, these types of ecologies and plant community types.
Yep.
He came down, had a look at the whole site, and firstly he said, well, the original biodiversity report misidentified the species in there as a particular type of forest.
Yeah.
And he said that it's pretty obvious that it is not that forest type at all. It's actually a Bengalay sand forest, which is listed under an EEC Act. And he said it's fairly obvious to me that they deliberately did it because these guys are experienced, the information was there, they knew about this Bengalay sand forest, and yet they particularly misidentified it so that they could develop it.
Which is why I've felt for a long time that developers should not be able to choose ecologists. Because
we agree.
Ecologists need to make money, and if you can't get a job because you're honest, that's not fair.
Yep.
If the only way to pay your bills is to be dishonest, it's fundamentally unfair.
It's definitely part of the submissions that we've put into various inquiries and instruments to sort of try and resolve this, because it just doesn't work.
It looks like it was a deliberate under-documenting so that it doesn't look like the type of protected forest that it truly is.
Absolutely correct. And he made it very clear that that's what he thought. And that's a big statement coming from a very respected ecologist such as him.
What's wild to me is I thought that coming to this site, the big argument would be that people need a place to live and there's not enough. There's a growing human population, and that's a slightly separate issue. We're probably having too many kids, but whatever. They have to go somewhere, and they need homes, and that's fair. But you mentioned that 64% of the homes in this area are already unoccupied.
Vacant, that's correct.
Vacant.
Yeah, yep. And maybe around the 6 weeks of Christmas, a percentage of them would be filled with holiday makers, Airbnb, and that sort of thing. But so it's crazy.
They're investments for people that already have a home somewhere else, that's a nice thing to do. But it's not worth cutting down all these forests just for people's investments. I can see the argument if they're like I grew up in Washington State in America. They've got these tent cities.
Yeah.
So many homeless people. But when you're talking about cutting down so many trees in places like this,
well, we just can't.
Holiday homes and second homes and Airbnbs.
There will be we're already paying a price for the environmental issues around the world. Not just only in Australia, even though Australia is one of the worst offenders, but we've got climate change happening. And that feeds right into that whole domino effect of our environment. You lose one species, you lose another. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists on its own. Everything relies on something else. And so once you start taking these important parts of this ecology out, the whole thing starts to fall over. It may not fall over snap like tomorrow, but ultimately it will fail. Yep.
You mentioned earlier in the mid-90s, and I got in when I was a kid in the 90s, but I got into conservation then also. And I remember in 1992 I was hugely passionate about the endangered spotted owl.
Owls are beautiful creatures.
Everything in the 90s was about forests, and then the trend moved to ocean, which is interesting. But you mentioned 1995. What happened? There was in this community something happened.
Yeah,
in
well,
1995.
so back in 1995, we got word that what was then state forest behind us here was going to be used as a megatip for Sydney's waste.
Right.
So we're not talking about, you know, your little local tip here. We're talking about a mega tip.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands upon thousands of tons of stuff. So the community came together.
And what sort of land area would we be talking?
Oh, gee, you've got me there. I can't remember. It's you know, back, but what was? Oh, absolutely. But what was really significant about it is that we knew, again, that forest was full of you know, a huge range of had huge biodiversity in there, and so the community came together and blockaded the bulldozers. I think it ran for 19 days, 24 hours a day. We had a little, back in the days we had telephones, real like, not mobile phones. No one had a mobile phone. So we had a telephone tree and everyone would, they're here, you know, ring around and ring around. In fact, an anthropologist came up from...
I have to pause you. What telephone tree? What are you talking about?
Yeah, so someone gets word that the bulldozers are on site.
Yeah.
And so you've got it, your thing is to ring two people, then they ring two people, and then they ring two people, and they ring.
Trees.
Yeah, right.
That.
Yeah.
And to tell the whole community.
Yeah, so get out there. But I mean, we had people camped there 24 hours. So as soon as something happened, I think, if I recall, someone might have had one of those old satellite phones or something and start the tree off, you know.
And you blockaded...
But we had kids and, we blockaded it. Yeah.
Blockaded the dozers or what?
Yes, absolutely. We built teepees over the dozers so they couldn't move.
You did what, sorry?
Built structures and put people on top so that the dozers couldn't move.
Have you got pictures of
There are pictures somewhere.
Oh my God. And you say you blockaded it, was it like people holding hands?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
See, I remember that era, and there was a lot of that stuff happening, but I never knew it was ever successful. And there was a part of me that always thought, does it make those of us that are environmentally inclined just look like crazy hippies and extremists? But you're saying it worked.
Well, we were one of the first.
Yeah.
In fact, we had an anthropologist came up from, I believe it was South Australian University, and he did like a thesis on it for his PhD, whatever. And
I'm gonna have to
I've read the thesis, and he says that actions after that time, let's say our blueprint that we used to blockade and stop that megatip was used time and time again. It was sort of the start of using that blueprint for a lot of other environmental actions around the place. So we were a bit chuffed about that, you know. But it was just people, it was just care, you know, people caring about the place, saying, hey, hang on. I took...
But it stopped it? They didn't do the tip? It didn't happen?
It didn't happen, yeah. And I think it was around 1998, 3 years later, after an amazing amount of work by the community, cataloguing all species in there and that, Bob Carr proclaimed it a national park. So now we've got Conjola National Park because of those actions of this community.
The whole Conjola National Park?
The whole Conjola, yeah. This part here anyway.
Wow, that just gave me chills.
Oh, yeah, so it's pretty cool.
That was this local community.
Mm-hmm.
There's 500 people? 500 homes in Manyana?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, all the villages-ish. Yeah.
That's a small community.
Yeah, well, like I say, 64% of them are vacant. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking more like, what, 200, 300 people
here?
Yeah,
that's right.
And has that always been kind of the number?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's so beautiful. I can see...
I think that people, you come to a place like this, 90% of us anyway, come to a place like this because of the natural beauty of the place.
Yeah.
It's an awesome place to raise your children and, give them connection with the natural environment. I've spent 40 years here, but I've actually living here, but I've actually spent Another probably 20 years or more on top of that, coming down here in the 70s as a surfer, young surfer. And so those sorts of experiences with whales, dolphins, the natural environment, even like possums and eagles, all these sorts of things that you see around really inspire you. I think it really gives you a type of grounding about who we are as human beings. I think we lose that in the city. And I can give you an example. If you just stop and for a while, or if you start walking through a bush, first day you'll see nothing.
Yeah.
The second day you'll go, oh, was that there yesterday? The next day you'll go, oh wow, look at that, look at that, look at that. And all of a sudden the bush opens up and it starts speaking to you, as our First Nations people say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what happens, you know. It's like our perspective gets really, well, it changes. I shouldn't say it gets thinned down, because you've got a city perspective as well.
Yeah.
But in the bush, you've got a different perspective. You're much more open to the natural environment if you're putting yourself out there into it.